This is going to be a brief introduction to SPSS. I'm using version 25. Some of you might have some older or newer versions, but it should be fairly similar depending on how far away we are from each other's version. SPSS stands for the Statistical Package for Social Sciences, and it's a very powerful statistics software. There are different ones out there, so you may hear of things like SAS or Stata, for example, or other popular statistical programs out there that let you do things differently. And some disciplines tend to prefer certain programs to another. It's really not that much unlike having different web browsers, which are just different tools for one particular purpose. So statistical analysis is what SPSS is all about. Don't be intimidated by it. It's just like any other computer program. It requires practice and a little bit of training, and you should be good to go. If you've had exposure to spreadsheets like Excel, for example, uh, this isn't too different. You should feel a little comfortable in terms of the way it works with columns and rows. It's very similar to a spreadsheet. In fact, Excel is also a very powerful statistical package in itself. So we have two main pages that pop up when you open up your SPSS software, and one is this one here, which actually has two tabs. One is called the variable view, and the other tab is the data view. We're going to talk about both of these. And the other one, the other page that pops up is this, which is your output. Okay, and your output is where all your results go. So after you do your analysis, your results will pop up here. And the thing to remember is that you need to save this separately from your data. Okay, the first one that we looked at over here, this is your data, which has two different tabs, and the other one is your analysis. Okay, and they're independent in that they're actually different files, and you can save them separately, and of course recall them separately as well. Okay, so let's pretend that we're interested in let's say that we're interested in analyzing a certain treatment across males and females, and let's say that we're interested in pain. I'm interested in pain, so we're going to use that, and that we wanted to see what the changes or the differences are in pain scores between males and females. Okay, that's just a simple setup. So what I described here is two different variables, right? The first one would be sex, male or female. So let's input that. Come up here, and the name of the variable, we are going to call it sex. And our options is, okay, what type of variable is this? This is what SPSS is asking me. And our options are whether they're going to be numeric, or whether it's going to be something like a date or currency or something like that. Most of the time we're going to work with numeric variables. Okay, sometimes we may work with string variables, but what we do, for example, here under sex, which our options are going to be male and female, is we actually code one number. We still use numeric values for that, and I'll show you in a second. But we're just going to leave this with what shows up over here. If you can see, it's saying that it's going to let it be two decimal places, which is fine, and the width, and these are for string characters or string variables, how wide they're going to be, and we're just going to leave that the same. Okay, so we're gonna say okay, and again, here is the width in decimals. This would be, if this was a string variable, how wide that variable can be, how many characters. In this case, it would be 8 characters long, and decimals, we're going to say 2, which is fine. if actually if our values were not going to be into the decimals, like sex, for example, I'm gonna say one is female, two is male. If that's the case, then we don't need any decimals, and so I can just say zero decimals. Okay. Your label is going to be, it's just a way of expanding or explaining a little bit more what your variable name is. There are some restrictions about the width and the type of characters that you can use here when you describe a variable. But when you go into your label, you can just go crazy and call it whatever you want. Okay. So in this case, there's really not too many ways of being of describing this, but I'm just gonna say sex of respondent. And that's my label. Okay, values. As I mentioned, we're actually going to have two potential values here, and I'm going to say that one is going to be female, and I'm going to add it, and I'm going to say that two is going to be male, and I'm going to add it. And now I've assigned values. Now, not not all variables are going to have different values, so for example, if we were working on our pain score here, it would be whatever the pain score is, so you just leave that blank. Okay, but since we are actually encoding a string variable as numeric, we are giving it values here just to explain ourselves. Missing is very important, this column, and essentially we'll talk more about this as in different videos. It has very significant applications, but what this is saying is how how do we code this as how did the researcher that went about to do this research go and code missing data? And although we don't like missing data and we hope that we don't have any missing data, there may be missing data. Okay, so what does that mean? That may mean that somebody refused, let's say, to answer that question. Somebody didn't want to answer that question, or you were unable to, for some reason, to get that value, or you literally lost it, which would be horrible. But you spilled your coffee on that piece of paper where you had that value, and now that's missing. So if that was missing, what value would you give it? How would you tell the computer that this is missing? And the reason why this is important is because SPSS does not count missing values in its analysis. So when it computes whatever it is we want it to compute, it will exclude missing values. So for now, let's just leave this blank, but keep that in mind. Okay. Okay. Columns is just determines the width of the column, as in this doing this right here, and the alignment of the column, whether you want it justified to the right, left, or center. So we just leave that blank. Measure. You recall from your class or any stats book that you've been exposed to. There are different levels of measurement. This is very important because of the rules of statistics is that we run certain kinds of analysis based on the level of measurement. Okay, so if you remember, nominal is the level of measurement that we're going to assign here, and this is basically when we have categories, but there's really no there's no set interval between these categories, no categories greater than the other, more of or less of. So clearly, sex, male or female, is a nominal variable. Okay, ordinal would be if you have and actually you might have heard this being called as categorical. It's the same thing, ordinal or categorical. And here you also have different categories, but in this sense, we can actually rank them from low to high. So, for example, if you're a high school graduate versus a non-high school graduate versus university or associate degree or whatever. These are different categories. So that would be ordinal. Okay. Scale is a catch-all term that SPSS uses for ratio and interval level measurement. Okay, and here's where we actually have numbers that are involved. We have specific intervals between those numbers. We have significant zeros, etc. But scale is it just SPSS just catches both interval and ratio as scale. Okay, so for example, for our pain score, we would put scale, and actually there's some controversy of whether that's an interval or ratio level variable. I would say it would be interval level variable, but in either case, SPSS doesn't care. It doesn't really make a difference to them whether it's interval or ratio. It would be labeled as scale. But since we're talking about sex, we're going to say it is nominal. For role, I want you to just not worry about it. This has to do with different options, and you tell SPSS how to use this in various other different analysis. So we're not really going to go into that. All right, but that's just what we did here. We just inputted our first variable, okay, on the variable view. And if we go to data view here, you can see there it is, okay? It's this column here. Alrighty. And so under our data view, we're actually going to see the data that represents each of these, the responses for each of these from all of our respondents. And so, assuming that, let's say that we use 10 people in our make believe study, okay, each of these numbers here, 1 through 10, is going to be used here. It's going to be a different case. So let's just fill that in right now. Let's say that this was a female respondent or participant number 1. This was also a female. This was a male. This was a female. This was a male. This was a male. This was a female, a male. This person refused to answer. Oh, but we didn't assign missing values, so forget it. But that's how you would input it if you actually had coded it as missing as 0, okay? But let's say it's a male, and let's say that this is also a male. All right. We go back to our variable view. Next, we said that we were going to say the pain score. So we'll call it pain. It's going to be, let's say that we're using a visual analog scale, okay, that the patient is going to use to self-report pain. So we know this is a numeric variable. We're not going to mess with the width or the decimals. We're going to leave that at 2. The label, this would be pain score. I could say using a visual analog scale if I wanted to, okay? We're not going to assign any values because this is just basically going to be straight up what the score is. We're not going to mess with missing, okay? Just for the sake of the video. Again, we're going to leave this as is, and this is going to be scale, right? As we talked about earlier. So now let's look back at our data view, and we see here that there's our variable. And it's important to note, you see these little dots that are there, okay, which are different than everything else here because there are no dots. So the dot actually means that's missing data, okay? And that means that the system is telling you, hey, this data are not here. What's going on? Okay, so if you see these dots, you should be concerned. Something's going on because we should have something here. So I don't know. Visual analog scale. Let's say that it goes from 0 to 10. Okay, with 0 being no pain and 10 being the worst pain ever. So we're just going to put some random numbers here. 8, 4, 5. Let's say this guy was 7.5. 2, 2, 6, 9. That guy was in a lot of pain. All right, so that's basically it. We have we have gone into variable view, and we have inputted two different variables. We have assigned them the type of variables that they are. We've told SPSS what they are. SPSS should be happy with that. We discussed the two different tabs here. Variable view, where we see explicitly what our variables are and how they were quoted, and data view, where we see our data, our actual data. Note that it goes, again, the columns are per variable, and each of these rows are a case. Okay.